the other decks, and that rounds out that deck list. So now we actually get to see the players moving into round 6. So let's jump right into it. The first card played on the table is Pascal from the right-sided player, Thuong, and then Dusty on the left side. We did see him earlier in the day, and he has been doing quite well moving into 5-0 territory here. And we do get to see Pascal quest for 1 and then play the very powerful Madam Mim. But what will be the response from Dusty? Dusty goes ahead and plays his 2-drop of choice. So I'm going to give it a quick little read, and then we move on back his way. Going to see what exactly the color combinations for these two players are going to be. Getting another lore point up to 2 lore. Does Madam Mim very reliably doing that because of its stat line being 3/3. And the Cusco on the other side, although it can draw a card when it is banished, it does not do well at removing such well-statted cards like the Madam Nim. So definitely a boon for a drawback. There is. And then we do get to see Dusty's turn 3 play as a Maleficent to match Thuong's Maleficent on the other side. This will allow him to go ahead and eventually trade with either the Maleficent or the Snake if he so chooses. He goes ahead and quests for 1 and passes, forcing a little bit of action from the side of Thuong. How does he want to trade into this Cusco, which again is just there to attract a little bit of attention. Anything that deals with that Cusco will allow Dusty to draw a card. And this Cusco actually quite fantastic as an early game tool. Glad to see it as the option that Dusty went for his early game of choice. Gonna see Maleficent actually sing friends from the other side. Combos all this time. And goes ahead and draws 2, gives himself the most amount of options before going ahead and inking a card. He's actually not going to ink anything yet, playing a 3-drop instead in the form of another Maleficent. Drawing a card, might as well draw as much as possible. If you do not have a 4-drop, you want to draw cards before playing your 4th ink, and then possibly playing something like the Pascal that we saw earlier in the game. So he does curve out like that and does choose to trade into that Cusco, allowing Dusty another card in hand. So they go ahead and end the turn with 4 characters in play and 4 ink, and a quite good curve out from the side of Thuong. But we'll see how Dusty decides to deal with the opponent's board. Does he actually decide to play it a little bit slower, just develop his board in response, and then rely on something like a Be Prepared, or does he want to aggressively trade with some of the cards on Thuong's side? Right now, he decides to draw cards because draw cards is always good. So we'll see if a 4-drop comes down here. It does look like it could be something like a goat or a rabbit. Either or would be a decent consideration. He does ponder for a moment before deciding. He actually retracts 4 and goes to 2 instead, and he decides to play the Russian Queen. So he does not want to fall too far behind and be forced to play or Be Prepared as early as turn 7 on curve. So he instead decides to trade with the tapped cards on Thuong's side. Bit of inefficient trading in terms of card advantage, but Dusty is prioritizing that sort of tempo instead of the card advantage, at least for right now, because he might consider himself the heavy favorite if the game goes long, so he does not want Thuong to have too much questing power. And Thuong says, I will go ahead and deal with your Maleficent of Maui. That is a good value trade, and gains 2 lore and passes the turn back. So 4 lore to 1, and Thuong is curving out quite nicely here. We will get to see if he has something like a Lady Tremaine to follow up on the turn 6. And in the meantime, how does Dusty want to reply with another 4-drop? He's going to draw a card. This is a consequence of the fact that he's going to be prepared at some point in the future, so he goes ahead and commits the least amount onto his field, playing a card that replaces itself twice over in the form of Merlin Rabbit, at the same time continues to give him more inkable options. And how will Thuong respond to this? Maui, even though it did get a value trade on the way back, it doesn't have any questing power here, so it won't get any additional value presumably until this Be Prepared is played, and in the meantime, Pascal will, in fact, get a little bit more value alongside his friend Maleficent. And does Dawn commit any more cards to the field of play with this Be Prepared looming in the background? He's going to tap 3, he's going to tap 7, 6, and go to the suspense. Pondering, making sure not to overcommit any option, and he actually decides to play the Yzma. So this is actually a fantastic play from Thuong for multiple reasons. He's going to get to recycle a draw engine card like the Maleficent that he could top deck later on in the game, and he's also going to draw 2 from doing so, applying pressure with the Yzma while at the same time drawing 2 cards in preparation for this Be Prepared that will soon be here. So definitely conscious choice from him and a good play overall. Not allowing Dusty any sort of favorable trades of any kind. Dusty will just go ahead and gain 1 lore, doesn't want to fall too far behind in that lore race. And he himself is going to actually do the same thing. So this Yzma is actually going to draw 3 cards instead of 2 because it put back a rabbit. So we have seen that combination over the course of the day, and that interaction is very powerful to refuel the Amethyst player's hand. So Dusty goes ahead and draws 3. We'll have access undoubtedly to an ink followed by a Be Prepared on the following turn. He has been telegraphing that card heavily over the course of the last few turns. I do doubt that Thuong is going to add something too meaningful to the field of play in this turn. He might take a turn off to draw a few more cards like we see here. And I wouldn't be surprised if he plays something like a second Yzma just to match the Yzma on the other side. This Pascal is going to most likely get the last point out the door, and in preparation for that Be Prepared, a very good installation play with this Merlin Rabbit, drawing him a card, and when it's removed, it'll draw him a secondary card. So a lot of floaters from the side of Thuong, forcing out the Be Prepared in the most awkward way possible. At this point in time, does Dusty even want, or can he afford to Be Prepared a board as safe as this one? We will get to see what he decides to do. He might be forced to, just because Thuong, again, is already at 9 lore to Dusty's 2, so might feel a little bit forced of a Be Prepared here. Ideally, he would want to be able to sing that card back down. Yzma, only being a 6-drop, won't be able to sing the very powerful Be Prepared, so we'll get to see how much Dusty wants to wait versus if he just wants to go ahead and fire off as early as next turn. Untaps, draws, adds it to the hand, immediately gains the 2 lore, inks, and definitely tap 7, play the very powerful Be Prepared. Thuong won't mind too much. Already knew. A couple of turns in the making was that Be Prepared. So how does he rebuild from here? Gave himself the highest amount of cards available with all the draw power he has done in the last couple of turns. So he will definitely have a powerful haymaker or multiple in this turn as a response. Contemplates very quickly, most likely determining what he wants to ink. Decides Fox. Ponders on 8 ink available. Dusty awaiting with a full hand of cards. He's going to have to deal with an Elsa, Spirit of Winter. So Elsa not getting any value from being played, but again, Elsa on an empty board still does represent 3 questing power, and at 9 to the opponent's 4, Thuong will not feel too terrible about adding that to his field of play. The ink on the other side is tapped down, but that's okay. And a Dragon's Breath, so decent amount of single target removal there, and then gets to curve out, tap out perfectly with an Arthur. So Dragonfire Arthur, good answer to the Spirit of Winter from the other side. And I do suspect players are going to trade resources back and forth over the course of the next couple of turns until one of them solidifies a spell book on either side. So whoever gets the spell book first, notably Thuong, if he gets it anytime soon, he will in fact be heavily favored in the race as he's already at 9 questing power. So we will see if Dusty is able to actually get his own spellbook plus enough removal for both this Arthur and this Lady Tremaine. Very decent 9 cost play, adding 2 threats to the table, also getting rid of Dusty's. So great play from the side of Thuong. And we will see if Dusty can answer. So another Dragon's Fire, actually prioritizing the Arthur over the Lady Tremaine simply because the Arthur could recycle some more enter play effects and then adding another of his own. So going back to Thuong, Thuong actually has had the ability to untap over the course of a few turns with some amount of questing power, in this case 2. So he'll go to 11, another chip in the bag for Thuong, and another Tremaine forcing a power card like Arthur to go away. Just a very cost efficient threat for these Amber or these Amethyst Ruby decks. And then this might be the nail to solidify game 1 for Thuong. He actually follows up with a spellbook. So he has 2 threats in play that demand an answer, plus the spellbook that will end the game automatically over the course of the next few turns if not dealt with. So Dusty with no board presence and facing down the spellbook. Looking grim for him, but he still has options available to him if he is able to solidify some sort of award advantage on this turn by getting rid of the Tremaines on the other side, and at the same time finds his spellbook relatively soon and can eke out a few lore here and there. He could try to mount a comeback, but it does seem dire if he's not able to deal with this Tremaines on this exact turn. So we'll see if he has the ability to do so. Developing yet another Arthur. Both players having heavy copies of Arthur. Wouldn't be surprised if it's 3 or 4. And then going ahead and bouncing it back. And then trading with a Tremaine. So good trade all around there. But will it be enough in the face of the spellbook again? Spellbook instrumental in control mirror matches like this one. Going ahead and drawing 2 more cards. But it does feel inevitable at this point with Thuong untapping with 2 questing power and the very powerful spellbook. So we will see how things transpire here. Very scripted play from the side of Thuong, just activating the cards he has in play that he is able to, and then most likely developing 1, if not 2, powerful threats on his side, and then moving forward. Protecting Tremaine against something like a rush character, Maui, for instance, just a good heads-up play. He doesn't have to commit that much onto the table with the presence of the spellbook, so he commits the minimal while also protecting the value he already has in play. So a very astute play from the side of Thuong, and Dusty does get to be prepared, but again, even at parity, he will be chipped down by the spellbook. So we will get to see if he wants to utilize Be Prepared or a different card on this turn. It does seem like he could do either a Tremaine of his own or a different option. He'd be prepared. Dusty understands that he is significantly behind because of the spellbook. He, in fact, has his own spellbook in hand, but because he is so far behind in terms of tempo in the game, being 1 or 2 haymakers behind each time, not being able to find that sort of value with the Lady Tremaines from earlier, it might just be soon to concede. If he finds something like a Maleficent here, it could spell a nice comeback into the game, dealing with Thuong's full board while at the same time having a card of his own. So decent rebuttal from the side of Dusty. Will this actually lead to a chain of events where he can gain enough lore to contest what Thuong is doing? And Thuong has to be very mindful to use just enough ink to leave the spellbook available every turn, and he does. So good on him to do that. Passes back, does donk Dusty. Dusty counting up for right now, uses a third Dragon's Breath. Ideal for this kind of scenario would have been something like a Maleficent on the Maleficent, but Dragon's Breath just as good if he has some follow-up to develop. Does have what feels like the fourth Arthur at this point, and still unable to develop that spellbook is Dusty. So now only having 3 turns to win the game from this position, not going to be enough. So Dusty is going to stay in the game just to see as many cards from the side of Thuong as possible, just to gain a little bit of information, and then he'll pack it up presumably this or the following turn. So, and that'll be that. So we do get to see the game would have been a lot closer if Thuong didn't actually have access to the spellbook. So the game would have dragged on, and Dusty might have been able to acquire a little bit of advantage back for himself. At that point, it would be which player has the most draw power, and in that case, Dusty seemed like he had a decent amount of cards in hand. So definitely important that Thuong had that spellbook to close out the game. So we will see players shuffle up. It's difficult for Dusty to have ever had a sort of a path to return into the game in that game, because he was, let's just say, 1 or a turn and a half behind in terms of being able to play a haymaker while at the same time having the ability to play a removal for what Thuong was doing, or something proactive like the spellbook. He did have access to it, but he never had a spot to actually develop it because of his lost position on the table. So I'm going to see if being on the play helps him a little bit in this game with that. I'm going to see if he finds the correct removal that he needs and how it lines up against what Thuong is doing. So players are going to contemplate their mulligans. Mulligan 6 from one side. Mulligan 5 from the other. And we will be underway shortly. Keys to the matchup definitely include forcing out Be Prepared like Thuong did in Game 1. Thuong understood that Dusty was actually going to be prepared as early as turn 4 in that game. It was very telegraphed from the side of Dusty. Dusty had no other choice because he fell so far behind in the first couple of turns of the game. He had to rely on that Be Prepared, and Thuong read that masterfully and was able to play things like Merlin, Rabbit, and Yzma in order to insulate himself against that very powerful sweeper card. So let's see if those events repeat themselves. Dusty does not have a turn 1 or 2, so if Thuong can solidify something like a 2-3-4 curve out here, he might be able to repeat the events of Game 1. But he does actually just have a pass in this case. Whoever gets down the spellbook in the early game might also be very favored. It just depends on how many copies of that card does each player have. And to get to see friends from the other side just drawing a couple of extra cards. Not sung, but just as good to draw 2 for the cost of 3. And that'll set up both ink and characters for the future for Dusty. So how does Thuong want to sequence his third turn? Does he actually have a Maleficent to convert on this empty table? And he does. So he is the first one to put a permanent in play. And it is that very powerful Maleficent to draw a card. So Dusty not under any significant threat, but again, it's not about the questing or lore in the early game unless it comes from multiple different characters. In this case, both players only have a Maleficent that can trade one with the other, so neither player is in a significant need to play something like Be Prepared later on. So that'll definitely favor Dusty a little bit, as he is the one that's going to first get to that turn 6 for Lady Tremaine, and that turn 8 for the Spirit of Wind, turn 9 for Maleficent. So he is on course to do that. But Thuong can then respond with some haymakers of his own. So both players have to be conscious about each other's plays and then play accordingly. This probably a rabbit if he has access to it. It's actually going to be a goat. Gain a little bit of chip lore here, up to 2. And then forcing the song on the other side. So instead of trading, he goes ahead and draws 2 with the song. Most likely indicative of him wanting to find something like a Maui in this turn to get favorable trades. He may not have found that, so instead he's going to play a smaller threat like the Fox. Fox is going to trade effectively with this Maleficent and survive on the way back. Perfect for the goat to pick off, but again, having already received its value. So very important that Dusty inks a 5th ink to not fall behind in terms of turns, and he does do that, so goes ahead and passes the turn. Not a very explosive turn 5 from Dusty. Ideal would have been something like the Maui, but again, he does have forward motion, and he will be the first one to solidify something like a Lady Tremaine. So he will essentially turn the corner into the mid game before Thuong, and that's good enough. But Merlin Rabbit insulating any sort of removal from the side of Dusty, so a good turn to solidify that, and then also goes ahead and sings. If there's any trading going on, he wants Dusty to force the trade. He doesn't really want to expend his goat on a card that already got value like the Fox, and at the same time wants to draw 2 before inking. So good sequencing all around from Thuong, and then Dusty draws, adds to hand. He does trade, and the reason he trades, he is most likely to have an empty board when Tremaine comes down, or just goes ahead and uses Maleficent to draw an additional card. So unable to curve out as effectively as Dusty would want. However, a decent amount of forward motion with these draw effects. So following that draw effect with Arthur. And this combination, if left unchecked, will actually net Dusty extra cards and extra safe lore. So definitely hoping Dusty is that these 2 cards will survive the turn cycle. But we'll see if Thuong has anything to say about that. Can't effectively trade into either of the cards because neither of them are tapped. It would be ideal to trade with one of them and then go ahead and Tremaine the other, but we'll have to settle with letting Dusty choose either or. And goes ahead and chooses the Maleficent. There is a world where Dusty would have multiple Maleficents in hand and would choose the Arthur to be the card to be discarded, but Arthur, if nothing else, is the more powerful card of the 2. And Dusty, first player to turn 7. Not really a pivotal turn other than for Be Prepared, but this is not the most ideal Be Prepared turn, so definitely an 8th ink will be what Dusty wants to be looking for. Oh, and we do see a very beautiful enchanted rare Maui deal with the rabbit on the other side. And we're going to see Maui recycled and 2 more lore added to the pile. And then Maui is actually going to go full circle and be used as ink as well. So goes ahead and removes the card, gains extra lore, and then becomes ink for his followers. So great play from the side of Dusty. Good to see that sequencing there. And just get to highlight the power of a card like Arthur. Now it also has to be removed from the side of Thuong, so Thuong has to do something like attack into it with the Tremaine and not gain the extra 2 lore. So overall, fantastic set of tempo play from the side of Dusty. So if Dusty has a decent answer for this Merlin Tremaine combo from the side of Thuong, he will be in a commanding position, but right now he's actually fallen completely behind on board. So something like A Be Prepared is looming, and Arthur is actually going to force that action unless Dusty has something like the likes of a Spirit of Winter. Doesn't seem like it here, so he goes ahead and pulls the trigger on the Be Prepared. Inks and passes turn. Draw, thus long, moving into the late game portion of this mirror match. He is one game ahead. He wants to solidify the 2-0 victory, giving himself the highest chance to find the cards that he needs with another rabbit. He's drawn quite a few of those, so good to see that, definitely for him. And follows up with a goat just to gain a little bit more lore. Again, we've seen these Amethyst decks not really having, without the help of something like this Elsa from the side of Dusty, they don't have a fundamental way to gain lore that explosively. It's more of a chip damage, incidental value course for them. But with this Elsa actually having 3 questing power will alleviate that a little bit for the side of Dusty and not allow Thuong to get too far ahead in terms of lore. Dusty obviously knows that something like that spellbook is looming in the future and has his own, so wants to be the one ahead in lore when those start dropping on the table. So this is the one disadvantage of playing Elsa on an empty field, not being able to solidify with something like Maleficent's first or Rabbit's first, is Tremaine gets maximum value in dealing with this Elsa. And an incredible inflection point in the turn, actually. This Tremaine got massive value in dealing with the Elsa while keeping the rabbit and the goat still alive on the other side, and also representing 2 questing powers. 4 questing power, and Dusty finds himself in an even worse position than last turn when he played the Elsa. So playing fully into the power of this Tremaine, and Tremaine just been instrumental in this mirror match thus far, forcing out the Dragonfire from the other side. And again, Dusty unable to find these sort of haymakers like the Maleficent there would have been decent, would have been able to sing something like Be Prepared in the future or Quest for 2, but only Dragonfire available after playing the goat. And now these 2 little critters will get to work. And without that much threat in place, something like an Yzma would be a good play on this turn, but he does actually decide to solidify the board with Maleficent. And now the threat of a Be Prepared number 2 is not that bad from the side of Dusty. Dusty does get a decent amount of value going ahead and using that, and he does so. The only unfortunate part, obviously, not being able to sing it, but in this mirror match, it's very unreliable to maintain such a large threat that could sing that very powerful Be Prepared card. So just having to hard cast it and pass, and that is just fine from the side of Dusty, but he is a couple of lore points behind, so something like a follow-up threat plus a book here could spell disaster for Dusty if Thuong actually has it, but Thuong has not drawn that many extra cards after the early game, so he might, even though he's not running out of cards per se, he might actually not have the most instrumental cards in the matchup that he could need. He might be flooding on removal instead of proactive cards, and we'll see if he actually plays an Elsa on an empty table. So we did see this from Dusty on the previous turn being heavily punished by something like a Tremaine. So if Dusty can find the Tremaine to deal with the Elsa while also developing a 2 questing power threat, he could seize control of the tempo in this game and be in a commanding position moving forward. So is there something even better like a Maleficent? And there is. Okay, so the Maleficent tagging the Elsa, incredibly powerful rebuttal from one side to the other. And Dusty is actually poised at this position if this Maleficent survives his turn to be able to gain control of the game and advance his lore counter a little bit. He did fall behind, like I mentioned earlier, in lore, so he has to find a way to eke out those extra lore points, and the Maleficent will deal with Maleficent, good old set 1 style, and then force yet another position from Dusty. we will get to see tap out Elsa. So actually allow the Maleficent to survive the turn cycle, but it will be tapped, letting Dusty deal with it in a future turn. Make sure not to untap the Maleficent. There you go. And then if Dusty is able to convert on this quest, he will be right back in the game. And again, it's just a race to see how many players can draw through their deck. And the card advantage is not necessarily the more important part. It is what types of cards they are drawing. And namely, it is a very powerful spell book that both players are looking for. So friends on the other side will get Thuong 2 cards deeper into finding that very powerful book. And playing it on this turn would be quite convenient, as he's actually ahead, and there is the incredibly powerful spellbook. So now the dynamic of the game changes. Now Dusty not only has to deal with Thong's board every single turn, but he also has to draw additional cards and present additional threats in order to race this spellbook. He is actually going to survive the turn cycle with Elsa, Spirit of Winter. And this Elsa Spirit of Winter is going to keep him alive in the race. It's going to be able to tap, gain 3 lore up to 8, and then it won't be that far behind from the 9 of Thuong. And if he can solidify this 3 lore with yet another bomb in play, the Maleficent on the side of Thuong will not be enough to maintain tempo of the game. And even if he's the first player with the spell book in play, it won't be enough to outrace what Dusty's doing. So incredibly good inflection point from the side of Dusty if he's able to convert on it, but he only has a Nim to be able to bounce his Elsa and protect it from the Maleficent, but that gives away full tempo advantage and seizing back tempo for Thuong while also being the player untapping with a spell book might be the end of this match. We're gonna have to see how much Thuong can convert in terms of revenge on this turn and what he prioritizes to do, but he is heavily favored as the one untapped with the spell book. He just has to make sure to leave one open each time in order to use that book, while also trying to dig further for the second copy or just dealing with Dusty's board in any way that he would like. And just to add insult to injury, goes ahead and quests for 2 more, solidifying his lead even further. So Dusty not out of it quite yet. He's actually in a decent spot to continue racing against what Thuong is doing. Thuong still eventually has to find answers to that Elsa that we know that Dusty has in hand and other possible threats. But if he does stabilize over the course of the next few turns, and we do see Elsa Spirit of Winter number 2 into play now, it's up to Dusty. Can Dusty actually find an out that doesn't lose to Maleficent, that also deals with this board from the side of Thuong? And very pivotally, is he going to have any point in time to develop his own spellbook? It just feels like he's in a very desperate situation here. Gonna get to see if he has any sort of play other than the Elsa, or if he does go ahead and commit to that. He actually doesn't. He goes ahead and Dragon's Breath, and this is decent. If he has a follow-up, something like Merlin Rabbit, he can actually continue to go wide in play while at the same time developing his questing bodies in order to race a little bit more. And he actually has no play on 5, so something like a Maui to deal with the Madam Mim on the other side would have been a decent conversion, because it also stores an answer against that Maleficent, but unfortunately not. There is the Maui, and you can see Dusty flicking a couple of cards in hand, might be running low on resources. I do suspect that both players are running low on resources, but again, in a scenario where that's possible, the spellbook will take over. And if he was running out of resources, he is no longer with the friends from the other side, drawing 2 cards, solidifying card advantage, board advantage, haymaker advantage, and spellbook for lore advantage. So in all fronts, Thuong is looking like a heavy favorite to close out this game. Does look Like he went all the way up to 15, and then is gonna go ahead and see if he can develop something with his 6 left. Oh, and it's actually going to be an Yzma again. Very fantastic play, just renouncing his 1-drop Pascal, saying Pascal has put in good work, but he's going to become 2 brand new cards off of this Yzma. Goes ahead and draws those inks for good measure, just in case he needs more ink in the future and for more versatile plays, and then passes the turn back. And Dusty in difficult position, down in lore, down on board, and with a Maleficent looming from the other side, as well as this spellbook. Does get to 10, half of the race way there. Does get to draw an additional card off of this Be Prepared, clears the field, and again, the spellbook ever lingering in play. With no matter how many Be Prepareds, spellbook will stay there. And he does actually tuck one of the ink with the spellbook, understanding the importance of activating it every single turn. Do very much enjoy that sort of subtle nod to the spellbook's importance, and don't want to forget in a situation like this, in a commanding lead like this one, want to be sure to activate it every single turn. So good on that. And then the goat will solidify the end of this game, being able to be recycled for 2 lore and then played again for a 3rd lore. So 4 lore gain on this turn, goes ahead and goes to 19. And at any point that this Merling leaves play, the 20th point will be assigned and the match will be over. So handshake there, and a victory for the side of Thuong. And again, just Thuong's ability to use efficient removal with the Lady Tremaines and then curve those out with the different Merlin packages that he has. Just a lot of efficient threats, and then closing it out with the spellbook. Very much like to see that efficiency from the side of Thuong. Don't see anything like the Dragon's Fire from Dusty. Dragon's Fires were decent at getting him back control of the game, but at the same time didn't develop any forward progress on the table. So it was almost as if he removed the card and passed turn every time he did a Dragon's Fire. So not the most efficient from the side of Dusty when using those, and that might have been the pivotal decision factor for Thuong to use things like Tremaine instead as his choice of removal. Again, the very powerful Lady Tremaine from the new Rise of the Floodpoint set. So